Well, welcome to our next psychological health talk. Today we're going to be talking about what is a psychologically healthy workplace. And in order to give you some background, I want to go through what's going to end up being a bit of a long story, but will kind of lead somewhere as we get through this. So what I want to do is I want to go back to 1997. At that time, the New Jersey Psychological Association started an initiative. They decided that they were going to award a business within their state, or a couple of businesses within their state, recognition for doing things in a psychologically sound way, so that they could highlight the process of using psychology in an organizational setting. In 1999 then, the American Psychological Association Monitor, which is a magazine that they put out for the psychologists, published an article about this new initiative. And when I saw that article, it was intriguing for me. So I went to our local Wisconsin Psychological Association, and I said, I saw this article in the Monitor. That was published, and by this time it was early 2000. It was just published just shortly. Is Wisconsin doing anything like this? And if it is, I'd like to become involved. All right, so I didn't hear anything back from the Wisconsin Psychological Association at all for 2 years. In 2002, I got a contact from the executive director at the time saying, we've decided as a board that we want to see if we can't do this psychologically healthy approach to organizations, and you had indicated that you had some interest in it, so we're wondering if you'd like to be involved. And so I got involved along with one of the Wisconsin Psychological Association board members and another individual who was a consultant. The next year they asked if I would become the Wisconsin representative to the American Psychological Association, because the American Psychological Association was starting a process in which they were going to make this psychologically healthy workplace something that they wanted to promote and encourage. So beginning in 2003, I began going every year to the American Psychological Association Leadership Conference as a representative from Wisconsin for the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards. Stayed with that for a very long time. So we worked with that program. I was there as part of the representatives, got elected to the steering committee for the American Psychological Association Initiative, eventually became the chair of that steering committee. And so I was intimately involved with it. The program continued, and we're going to talk about what the program was in just a second, but the program continued then throughout all the way up through the beginning of the pandemic. In 2001, because everything was shutting down at that point, the American Psychological Association indicated that they wanted to suspend that program, and so at that point there was no activity from the American Psychological Association. The story doesn't end there, and I'm going to get back to the remainder of the story in just a minute. But I want to talk a little bit about what the psychologically healthy workplace began to be. What you see here are that the American Psychological Association began giving awards to organizations across the United States and Canada for being exemplars of what we called a psychologically healthy workplace. As it happens, when they began giving these national awards, a Wisconsin company, Versant Solutions, became the first winner of the small business category for the National Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards given by the American Psychological Association. And so we had a really strong start, and I continued to work with that organization, with that group, and we had large organizations as large as major hotel and retail groups, as well as medium organizations, as well as small organizations like Versant Solution was at the time that it won the award. So the awards were part of it, and really the part of it that the American Psychological Association was most focused on. We're going to get to why that's an important process and an important limitation in just a second. But what is a psychologically healthy workplace? So these are the qualities that were identified, starting with the qualities that they used to make the judgment in New Jersey to give the original awards, and then refined over the years. We had a scientific community that did a number of studies about these qualities to make sure that we clarified what they were, to make sure that they were accurate, to make sure that they actually contributed to a better workplace environment. And what we were looking for is that it would have an impact both on organizational effectiveness and on employee well-being, because what we postulated and what proved to be true was that there's a strong connection between the two. Now, that isn't to say that every organization believes that. There are many organizations that would never get recognition as a psychologically healthy workplace. There are many organizations that believe that the employees are only there to the extent that they can contribute to the bottom line, and it really is the bottom line that the organization is all about. One of the things that we discovered in the research that we did and the communication that we had with organizations was that that kind of an approach, the bottom line is the main approach, main goal of an organization. Employees are only a contributing factor to that, and they're essentially expendable if they're not contributing to the organization's bottom line. It turns out that that's not as true as many of those organizations would imagine that it is. And that becomes important in an era in which we are looking at major technological change in artificial intelligence, and how artificial intelligence will change the workforce. And so we want to take a look at how these attributes, these 5 attributes that I'm going to talk a little bit about, how they contribute to both organizational effectiveness and employee well-being, and how the two are connected. So the first quality is the quality of employee involvement. Sometimes, particularly those organizations that don't see the true value of their workforce, that is a minority, by the way. Most organizations do recognize, or at least understand to some degree, the importance of their employees. Employee involvement is a critical piece of the puzzle. So if I'm a great leader or a great owner of a business, and I think that it is my energy, my ideas, my effort that makes the organization work, it turns out that that's not true. And in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about this more next week when we talk about the psychology of excellence. When we look at sports teams, and we look at the greatest stars of the organizations that win the most titles, what we find is that organizations need a really strong team in order for that star to really do their job. One of the places that this shows up is they did a study of the top cardiac surgeons in the country. They determined this by individuals who had the best outcomes, people who underwent cardiac surgery, were able to recover, there was a low mortality rate, they were able to get on with their lives better. What they did with this particular study is they tracked those top cardiac surgeons. And when a top cardiac surgeon moved from the hospital system in which they were functioning to a new hospital system, what happened was that they became average cardiac surgeons. Because as much talent as they had, the team was equally responsible for the outcomes. That's why employee involvement is so important. To be a great leader, I need great followers. I need people who are working with me shoulder to shoulder to create the organization. And that means that I need their involvement, I need their input, I need their energy, I need their inventiveness, their innovation. Remember talking with one of the Wisconsin companies, and they had an interesting policy. They had quarterly all employee meetings, all organization meetings. In order to be able to attend those meetings, it was required that you had to have an idea about something that would make you able to be better at your job. I remember talking with an individual who's a maintenance person, and he had just been hired a couple of months earlier, and he was about to encounter that first company-wide meeting that he was going to be invited to, and he said, I couldn't wait because when I got here, I could see things that we could do that would make the maintenance of our buildings much more successful, and I couldn't wait to share it. Well, that's the kind of energy that you get when you actually have great employee involvement, and that transforms the entire organization. One of the things that we'll see with the new technology of artificial intelligence is that artificial intelligence can really function to give lots of very sophisticated information in a very short period of time, sometimes seconds, certainly not longer than a few minutes, depending on how complicated the question is. What it doesn't do is help the organization to determine of all of that data, what's really going to be important. And that's where employee involvement will not be substituted for artificial intelligence. You need employees who are dedicated to the organization's mission, its substance, in order to be able to take this piece of data and use it over here, and that piece of data isn't as important, and so that can be sidelined for a while. That comes from having people who have experience, who are able to understand that information, but also see how it can be applied. Artificial intelligence won't help us to apply it. It takes actual human beings who are actually engaged to be able to make sense out of all of that data. So that leads us to our second quality, which is growth and development. So it is the case that oftentimes in downturns of the economy, one of the things that organizations have a tendency to do is they cut their training budgets first. That turns out to be something that great psychologically healthy workplaces don't do, because they recognize that part of what happens is that when individuals are growing, when they're developing, when they're becoming more and more experts in their area. It adds a quality to the entire organization. You get some pushback with this with some executives who say, why should we train people? Because they're going to get the advantage of all of our training, and then they're just going to go and work someplace else. Well, it turns out that when I get really great training in my organization, it doesn't mean that I want to do that so that I can work someplace else. If I really feel like you value me and I'm able to contribute, that makes me want to stay. And those organizations that do that effectively have a stable workforce of the best of the people that are in their organization. So focusing on growth and development as part of an organization's lifestyle really creates an organization in which you have great expertise and you have great loyalty to that company, because the company is making each individual a better person. One of the main ways that we get our identity and our value is by being good at the work that we do. That's particularly true in the American society, where we have a high value on work. And so growing and developing is always a part of that. Work-life balance. This has a lot of different names. It can be viewed in a lot of different ways, but being able to recognize that human beings are set up to work and rest. Work and rest. Work-life balance implies that we can't always be working. And in fact, one of the things that we notice, so in the European societies, particularly some of the countries like Denmark and Finland and Norway, they have more vacation time than we have in the United States. And they do this for a very specific reason. They have discovered that when you give people vacation time and people actually use that vacation time, they're more productive at work. By contrast, in the United States, we have less vacation time, and sometimes we see people that don't even use their vacation time. And one of the things that does is it leads to kind of a long-term kind of burnout. You need those breaks. You need those times to be away in order to be refreshed. This is true on a lot of different levels, but that work-life balance means there needs to be time off of work. There needs to be time that during the day I can work and work really hard, but then I have time when I'm not at work. It might be with family, it might be with friends, it might be with my favorite dog, it might be just doing something that I find is a relaxing hobby, but I need that balance in order to be really, truly effective. Health and safety is the fourth of the qualities. Obviously, when we talk about a psychologically healthy workplace, it implies health and safety. And last week, when we talked about bringing the science of happiness to work, we talked a little bit about how that organizations can contribute to the health of their organizations, particularly the psychological health of their organizations. It is also necessary for organizations to treat that need for a safe environment, a healthy environment, as part of its overall organizational effectiveness. That not only helps the employees, but it helps the organization, because the organization then is not as susceptible to long downtimes, medical leaves that extend on and on, but instead help people to be able to function in the very best way that they can. One of the tricks to that, of course, is that in order to do that, we have to think in a longer framework. So if there's a project that needs to be done and there's a deadline, that deadline has to be viewed in the context of, if it's just deadline after deadline after deadline, the individuals that are working on that deadline are going to become less effective. We have to look at, in the long term, make sure that we're providing opportunities for them to take care of themselves physically, psychologically, relationally, in social situations, even spiritually, in order for individuals to work at their best. So health and safety is not simply a way to prevent illness, it's a way to help people to become able to be their best, to be able to bring the entirety of their talent and skill to the work that they do. Finally, there's the area of recognition, and organizations that are really effective will take the time to recognize the value of their workforce. It is the case that sometimes in some organizations what can happen is that a particularly aggressive or hard-charging executive may be prone to just pushing and make this correction, do this better, without taking the time to recognize what's really working. But there is really solid evidence that organizations that recognize what works actually do better. And it works, we talked a little bit about this in kind of some of our previous health talks. If I know what's working and I can identify it, then I can do it again. So you recognize that what I did worked, so I can do it again, and again, and again. And if it's working, I can try it over here, and try it in this part of the organization. And pretty soon, one of the things that happens is that recognizing good work starts to spread. And it makes the entire organization looking for opportunities to do the very best job possible, rather than simply looking to avoid mistakes. So these are the qualities that are involved in a psychologically healthy workplace. And you can see how it ties in both to organizational effectiveness and to employee well-being, and why that's important. So here's a roadmap for this. And what we're going to do is just going to quickly go through this, because I want to talk a little bit about what's happened next. So at the very end or the very beginning of trying to develop a psychologically healthy workplace, we need to identify the disorders that are causing problems. So this is done from a healthy thinking perspective. We could do the same thing for medical illnesses, but we need diagnosis and treatment. We need to identify what the disorders are. We need to address the crises. Because if you've got a workforce that's sick, you've got a workforce that really doesn't work very well. So the very first thing is to identify what the problems are and rectify those problems so that those things can get treatment and be rectified. When that happens, one of the things that does is it moves us into the area of prevention. So prevention means I know that these kinds of long work hours, just to use an example, these kinds of long work hours lead to less effectiveness. So I'm going to prevent that by having regular breaks. And that will prevent somebody from being so tired because they're working so long that they make more errors. And that prevention helps me to improve my effectiveness. When that happens, we get into what's called the psychologically healthy workplace. Organizational effectiveness improves. Employee well-being improves. And we begin to start to create this culture. And the culture begins to take on a life of its own, so that the organization gets better, but it also becomes a better and better place to work. When that happens, performance increases, and that moves us towards organizational excellence and high-performing individuals with extraordinary outcomes. So there is a process in which we start by by effectively trying to rectify problems, then energize the organization by creating a psychologically healthy workplace, which leads to the outcome of having organizational excellence. And so for the long term, for any organization that wants to achieve this, this is the roadmap that will get us there. And we'll talk more about the psychology of excellence next week. So that leads me to what happened. So 2021, the American Psychological Association decides that they are going to stop promoting the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards. There's a steering committee, as you remember. I was the chair of that steering committee. One of the American Psychological Association employees, a psychologist by the name of David Ballard, had recently left that position and gone into full-time consulting. We began to talk, and what we did is our steering committee that consisted at the time of 7 of us. There's now 5 of us that are still remaining because of retirements and things like that. We decided we would keep getting together and we would change our focus just a little bit. So what we began to do, we set up this place called the Psychology Collaborative, which you can find there, psychologycollaborative.org. We call it the Psychology in the Workplace Collaborative. And we began to focus not simply on awarding companies or recognizing companies that are doing it well, but beginning to look at, excuse me, how we can help executives get better at being able to put these kinds of processes and policies and structures into place. And so we began to do what we are trying to do is a quarterly webinars that are focused for business leaders. And the webinars include three individuals typically, sometimes 4. One is a person with scientific expertise, somebody who knows something about the psychology of workplace, psychology of organizations, in this case, critical thinking skills for this upcoming organization. The second person that is in the webinar is a business leader, somebody who is working on a day-to-day basis trying to apply some of the skills that the scientific leader are talking about. So we have this dialogue. What are the problems with implementing this? What are the successes that are implementing this? How does this theory get applied in the real world? And then one of our team, we do this on a rotating basis, is the individual who's the kind of the moderator who begins to ask the right questions and keeps this conversation going. So our next webinar is scheduled for October 16th in 2025, and we're going to talk about developing critical thinking skills for the application of artificial intelligence in the workplace. Obviously a big issue, something that is on the horizon and is starting to move into organizations. We want to make sure that the best of psychological science is available for organizations so that we continue to focus on employee well-being while helping the organization to be as effective as possible, all the while moving towards excellence. So that sets us up for our next conversation next week, in which we're going to talk about the psychology of excellence. What is an expert? How does it develop? What do you need to do to become a better expert in your own field? So be sure and join us for our next psychological health talk. You can find it on our YouTube channel, which is you just go to YouTube and put in Stress Management Clinic, and it will take you to our page where you can find all of our psychological health talks. Thanks for your attention. When you get there, if you're enjoying something, please hit like and subscribe so that we can keep these these talks fresh and keep them coming your way. Thanks.